She built the policy that destroyed her. She just forgot I was the one keeping score. At 8:47 on a Tuesday morning in Auckland, the boardroom on the 14th floor of Hartwell Logistics was running exactly on schedule. The agenda had been circulated the previous Thursday. The room held 6 board members, 2 external governance advisors, a company secretary, and 1 HR director who had spent the weekend certain she was about to end my career. She was not wrong that a termination was coming. She was wrong about whose. At 8:47, the chair, a measured woman named Patricia Osei, who had sat on 3 boards before this one, set a printed document on the table. She did not hand it to me. She did not hand it to Vanessa Holt. She placed it in the center, where everyone could see the cover page, and she asked the room to hold the first agenda item, my employment hearing, while the board addressed a mandatory governance matter that had come in overnight through the company's formal compliance channel. That governance matter was a 74-page internal audit dossier, time-stamped, immutable, generated entirely inside the compliance software that Hartwell Logistics used for all its internal audit and disclosure work. The same software Vanessa Holt had personally mandated 2 years earlier. I watched Vanessa's face across the table as Patricia read the document reference number aloud. I have thought about that moment many times since. What I remember is not triumph. What I remember is stillness, hers and mine both, and the particular quality of silence that fills a room when something that was always true finally becomes visible to everyone in it. Patricia turned to page 11. She read out a company name, Meridian Staffing Solutions. She noted that Meridian was listed in the dossier as Hartwell's primary contract labor vendor, accounting for the majority of the company's contingent workforce spend over the preceding 4 years. Then she looked directly at Vanessa and asked her to confirm or correct the record. Did she, as of the date of the most recent annual conflict of interest disclosure cycle, hold a registered equity stake in Meridian Staffing Solutions? The question sat in the air. Vanessa said nothing for long enough that the company secretary stopped typing. Then she said she would need to speak with her legal representative before answering questions of that nature. Patricia nodded once. She made a note. She moved to the next item. That was the moment. Not loud, not dramatic, just a question, a silence, and a note in the margin, and 6 years of carefully constructed authority began to come apart at the seam. On the table in front of me was a separate document, the formal termination case Vanessa had built against me over the preceding 3 months, culminating in a data misuse allegation she had filed the week before. The allegation claimed I had been improperly accessing vendor financial records outside the scope of my role. It was a neat piece of work. It had the right language, the right HR procedure codes, the right references to the company's data governance policy. Vanessa was meticulous when it served her. What the termination case did not account for, what it could not account for, was that every vendor financial record I had ever accessed was a standard input to the quarterly compliance reconciliation my role was explicitly tasked to perform. Every access log was stored inside the same system she had mandated. Her allegation was, in the plainest possible terms, a complaint that I had done my job correctly and kept a record of it. The irony was not lost on the governance advisors. I saw one of them write something in the margin of his copy within the first 20 minutes of the hearing. The termination case was tabled but not heard. The governance matter took precedence, as it always must, under the company's own board charter. A charter Vanessa had helped revise 4 years earlier. By 9:30, Patricia had confirmed that the dossier would be referred to the External Audit Committee for independent review, and that Vanessa's participation in any further HR decisions would be suspended pending the outcome. Vanessa left the room before the coffee arrived. I stayed. I answered every question put to me in a flat, factual register. And when Patricia asked me directly whether I had shared the contents of the dossier with any third party prior to submission, I said no, and the system's own time-stamped access logs confirmed it. Nothing in the dossier was mine. Every line of it belonged to the company's own record. I had simply filed it correctly, through the correct channel, at the correct time, in response to the correct policy cycle. But to understand how an HR director who had run that company's people function like her personal kingdom handed the board the precise instrument of her own removal, we have to go back 18 months. We have to go back to a Tuesday afternoon in the compliance office on level 7, and a vendor reconciliation report that crossed my desk in the ordinary course of a quarterly review. A report that nobody else had found interesting because nobody else had looked at it the way I did. The number was 22%. That was the gap between what Hartwell was paying Meridian per contract head and what the market composite rate showed for equivalent roles. It was not dramatic. It was not a red flag on anyone's dashboard. It was just a number, sitting quietly in a spreadsheet column, waiting for someone to follow it. I followed it. And for the next 18 months, while Vanessa Holt ran her kingdom and managed her allies and filed her allegations and read my silence as surrender, that number grew into 74 pages, filed correctly, time-stamped by the system, and completely beyond anyone's ability to alter, suppress, or explain away. That is where this story begins, with a number and a new file, and a woman who understood that the most dangerous thing in any building is not the person with the title, it is the person with the log. Let me take you back 18 months, back to the beginning, or at least to what looked like the beginning. I joined Hartwell Logistics on a Tuesday in April. Mid-level compliance officer, the kind of title that makes people at networking events find a reason to refresh their drinks. Unremarkable on paper, but in practice it meant access to almost everything. Vendor contracts, payroll reconciliations, audit trails, procurement sign-offs. Every system the company ran passed through my line of sight at one point or another. I understood this on day one. I don't think anyone else gave it much thought. Vanessa Holt had been HR director for 6 years by the time I arrived. 6 years is long enough to build something, and she had built something. Not a department exactly, but a geography. A territory with invisible borders and very clear rules about who moved freely within them. You learned those rules by watching. The payroll manager had been promoted under Vanessa's recommendation after the previous one raised concerns about headcount reporting. The procurement lead had his contract renewed 3 months early, unusual timing, following a period in which he'd quietly stopped escalating queries about Meridian staffing solutions. 2 of the 5 general managers in the Auckland office had received performance rating upgrades. In the same quarter they stopped attending Vanessa's oversight briefings and started attending her informal Friday lunches instead. None of it needed to be. The architecture was social, and it had been constructed over years with patience and precision. Meridian Staffing Solutions supplied the company's contract labor workforce, warehouse operatives, logistics coordinators, short-term administrative cover. It was the firm's primary external staffing vendor. The contract had renewed twice without competitive tender in the time Vanessa had been HR director. Each cycle processed through a procurement sign-off that listed her name as the approving authority. 18-month renewals, consistent billing, no review. I did not know any of this on day one. I learned it the way you learn most things in a compliance role, through numbers. The vendor reconciliation report is a quarterly task. You pull the billing rates from each active vendor, weight them against the market composite data from the industry register, and flag anything sitting materially above benchmark. It takes about 3 hours. It is, by general consensus among people who have never done it, extremely boring. I ran the Q2 reconciliation 8 weeks after joining. Meridian's per-head billing rate came in at 22% above the market composite. Not a rounding error, not a one-quarter anomaly. When I cross-referenced the prior 8 quarters of records available to me, the variance was consistent. 22% quarter after quarter, year after year, processed and approved without escalation, without question, without a single note in the procurement file requesting a market review. I flagged it to my line manager in a short written note. Factual. No conclusions, just the number and the methodology I'd used to derive it. The response came back the same afternoon. 4 words in the body of the email. No attachment, no explanation. Vanessa has reviewed. No action required. I read it twice. Then I closed the email, and I said nothing. But I opened a new file inside the compliance platform. the same software Vanessa had mandated for all internal audit and documentation work 2 years earlier, citing the need for immutable, time-stamped record-keeping that could withstand external scrutiny. I named the file Vendor Billing Review, Q2 Ongoing. I pasted in my reconciliation, the benchmark data, the approval chain, and the response from my line manager. The system logged the entry automatically: date, time, user credentials, action performed. I began logging. Over the following months, the picture widened. A contract operations manager named Bridget Tam raised a formal query about Meridian's invoicing methodology in a procurement review meeting. She wanted to understand why the per-head rate didn't decrease when the contracted headcount increased, as would be standard in volume pricing. The meeting minutes were circulated the following week. Bridget's question was not recorded. 3 months later, Bridget was placed on a performance improvement plan. By the end of the quarter, she had resigned. I logged the sequence: dates, documents, meeting minutes showing the omission, the HR correspondence that followed. A formal diversity audit commissioned by the board was submitted to Vanessa's office for formatting before its presentation to the governance committee. The version that reached the committee was shorter than the version submitted. 2 sections had been removed: one on contract workforce representation, one on vendor diversity criteria. I obtained both versions through standard document version history inside the compliance system. I logged them both, side by side, with the differential annotated. Then Vanessa turned her attention to me. It was gradual. A role reclassification proposal emerged from HR, suggesting that the compliance function would benefit from direct reporting into the HR director's office. Efficiency rationale, cleaner governance lines, no particular urgency. My line manager mentioned it in passing. The way you mention something you already know is going to happen regardless of what you think about it. The proposal made no operational sense. Compliance reporting into HR is the kind of structural arrangement that auditors flag immediately, because it removes the independence that makes a compliance function meaningful. Vanessa knew this. She had a postgraduate qualification in employment law and had been in the industry for 20 years. She did not want to manage my output. She wanted to see what I was looking at. I completed the reclassification consultation paperwork as required. Every form, every response, every procedural step, all logged. I raised the governance concern about independence through the appropriate internal channel, in writing, and attached the relevant section of the New Zealand Institute of Directors' Guidance on Compliance Function Structure. Polite, factual, on the record. By the time the reclassification was quietly shelved, no announcement, no explanation, the dossier had grown to 41 pages. Vanessa had decided I was not worth the visibility. She thought my silence meant I had nothing. She was, by then, already wrong. It is a small thing that breaks it open. Not a confrontation, not a threat, just a 2-day gap. I had been logging inside the compliance platform for 12 months by then. Quiet work, off to the side, methodical. Entry by entry, vendor reconciliation by vendor reconciliation. The dossier was building weight without anyone watching it grow. I had been careful. I thought I had been careful enough. Then I confide something to Daniel Reyes. Not much. A specific concern about a discrepancy I have found in Meridian's October billing summary. A detail I have not yet entered into the system. Something I am still tracing. Daniel is the person I have worked alongside most closely since joining Hartwell. Patient, understated, the kind of colleague who remembers how you take your coffee. I trust him the way you trust someone who has given you no reason not to. 2 days later, Vanessa Holt changes her approach to me. Nothing dramatic. She simply begins asking my line manager for updates on my quarterly outputs. The specific quarterly outputs that would cover vendor reconciliation work. The timing on its own means nothing, but it sits with me. I go back through my notes. I find 3 earlier instances, 3 moments over the preceding 4 months, where a shift in Vanessa's behavior toward me followed, within 48 hours, a conversation I had shared with Daniel. Each one a narrow window, each one a detail only he had heard. I do not confront him. I do not even let myself reach a conclusion about him. I simply do the arithmetic, and then I stop. I stop telling Daniel anything. I understand later, though not until after everything has concluded, that Daniel's visa renewal sits entirely within Vanessa's HR function. She controls the paperwork that controls whether he stays in the country. He is not disloyal by nature. He is frightened, and fear is a more effective lever than money ever is. I carry no anger toward him, but I cannot afford to carry him either. From that point on, I work alone. I reroute everything. Off-hour sessions, early mornings before the open plan fills, occasional late evenings when the floor is quiet and the only light is the screen. I work inside the compliance platform under standard audit user credentials, the same credentials Vanessa's department issued to my role when I was hired. The same access tier the platform's own user policy defines as appropriate for quarterly reconciliation work. Every entry I make is time-stamped by the system, not by me. The system records the time, the credential, the access path, and the doc tab. I cannot alter those entries retroactively, and neither can anyone else. That is, of course, the point. Vanessa mandated this platform. She signed the implementation memo herself. Every record I am creating exists inside infrastructure she approved, under credentials her department controls. Whatever I am building, it belongs to the company. Legally, unambiguously, entirely. The quarantine does something I do not anticipate. It sharpens me. With no one to speak to about the work, I write more precisely. I source every claim back to a primary document. I cross-reference billing dates against board approval minutes. I pull the Meridian contract renewal cycles and lay them against Vanessa's internal sign-off records, line by line. The entries I produce in those 6 weeks are the clearest in the file, tighter, more specific, more heavily evidenced than anything I logged in the first 10 months. Isolation removes the temptation to summarize. When you cannot talk about what you are finding, you learn to let the document speak instead. By the time the file reaches 74 pages, I have not discussed it with a single person inside the building. Vanessa, for her part, reads my silence as surrender. This is her miscalculation, and it is a significant one. She has spent the better part of 6 months applying low-level pressure, role reviews, restructuring proposals, pointed questions routed through my manager. When none of it produces a reaction, when I continue arriving on time and completing my outputs without complaint or visible distress, she concludes I am either unaware or too cautious to act. Neither possibility concerns her. Both, from her position, look like safety. So she reaches further. In the 3rd week of October, a formal allegation lands in my inbox, copied to HR and my line manager. The allegation is filed by Vanessa's office. It claims I have been improperly accessing vendor financial records, records outside the scope of my role, accessed without authorization, constituting data misuse under the company's own information governance policy. I read it twice. Then I set it down and finished my coffee. The vendor financial records in question are Meridian's quarterly billing summaries. They are, precisely and specifically, the input documents for the quarterly compliance reconciliation that my role exists to perform. The task is written into my position description. It is referenced in the compliance functions procedural manual. The access logs, showing my interaction with those documents, sit inside the same platform whose implementation Vanessa signed off on, recorded against credentials her own department assigned to my account. Her allegation is, in the most precise possible terms, a formal complaint that I did my job. She schedules a termination hearing for the following Tuesday. I spend the weekend at my kitchen table, not drafting a defense, not composing a rebuttal. Instead, I pull up the company's conflict of interest annual disclosure policy, a document Vanessa authored herself 3 years earlier in her own name as a demonstration of governance best practice. The policy establishes a mandatory annual disclosure cycle. It requires all senior personnel to declare any financial interest in entities with which the company holds a commercial relationship. It mandates that supporting evidence submitted to that cycle be reviewed at board level. It contains, in plain language, a clause stating that submissions received through the compliance function cannot be redirected, withheld, or deprioritized by any single department head. Any single department head. On Sunday evening, I log into the compliance platform one final time. I attach the 74-page dossier to the active annual conflict of interest disclosure cycle as a supporting submission. I do not file a grievance. I do not raise a formal complaint. I just let the paper trail win. I do not address it to Vanessa, or to my manager, or to anyone in HR. I submit it to the board's governance inbox, as the policy requires. Then I close the file, shut the laptop, and go to bed. The hearing is scheduled for 9 o'clock. I arrive at 8:43. The boardroom on the 14th floor has a long glass wall facing the harbor. On a clear Auckland morning, the light comes in flat and white, the kind that leaves nowhere to hide. I take a seat on the far side of the table, not the chair reserved for me near the door, which is where a person awaiting termination would sit, but a chair 2 positions along, closer to the window. Nobody asks me to move. By 8:51, the board members are seated. The chair, a measured woman named Miriam Talfa, places a printed document face down in front of each member. 74 pages. I know exactly how many because I assembled them, but I say nothing. I set my notebook on the table and uncap my pen. Vanessa Holt arrives at 8:58. She walks in carrying a folder. Her folder, the one containing the termination paperwork she has spent the better part of 3 weeks preparing. She is composed. She has done this before. Stood in this room, presented a case, watched a name get removed from the payroll. She sits down, opens the folder, and for the first time notices the documents already distributed around the table. She picks up her copy. She reads the heading. Miriam Talfa clears her throat. Before we address the item Vanessa has listed on the agenda, she says, the board needs to work through a governance matter that arrived via the compliance platform overnight. It falls under the annual conflict of interest disclosure cycle. Given the nature of the supporting submission, I'd like to treat it as the first order of business. Vanessa's folder closes. The chair does not look at her with hostility. She looks at her the way a board chair looks at a problem that has already been identified and categorized. Vanessa. The submission references an equity interest in Meridian Staffing Solutions registered in your name. The declaration fields in this year's disclosure cycle and in the 2 preceding cycles are blank against that vendor. Can you help the board understand that? The room is very quiet. Not the quiet of tension, the quiet of a question that has already been answered by the documents in front of everyone present. Vanessa begins to speak. Something about the structure of the holding, something about a family trust, something about disclosure obligations being a matter of interpretation. The words are technically formed, but they do not land. Across the table, the board's legal counsel is already marking passages in the dossier with a yellow tab. The company secretary has opened her laptop. I write the time in my notebook, 9:04. Then I set down my pen and wait. It takes 11 minutes for the data misuse allegation, the allegation built to end my career, to be addressed. Miriam Talfa reads it aloud from Vanessa's own submission, then turns to the dossier and reads aloud the relevant access log entries, standard quarterly reconciliation functions performed under audit user credentials, inside the compliance platform Vanessa's own department had issued and mandated. The legal counsel confirms what the log entries already make plain. Every record I accessed was a standard input to the role Vanessa had defined. Her allegation is not merely weak. It is, on the face of the company's own system records, the opposite of what she claimed. The termination case does not get read out. It sits in its folder on the table. Vanessa asks for an adjournment. The chair declines. The equity stake in Meridian, undisclosed across 3 consecutive annual disclosure cycles, triggers a referral obligation written into company governance policy. The policy does not offer discretion on this point. It was drafted 3 years earlier, approved by the board, and signed into the compliance framework by the head of HR. By Vanessa. External auditors are engaged the following morning. Their preliminary findings arrive within a fortnight. Meridian's per-head billing rate had run 22% above the market composite for 4 consecutive years. Across the full contractor headcount, the cumulative figure is significant. Not an administrative rounding error, not an oversight that a reasonable person could fail to notice. It is the kind of number that changes the nature of the matter entirely. The governance referral becomes a financial damage finding. The financial damage finding triggers a mandatory notification to the New Zealand Serious Fraud Office. That notification closes every exit Vanessa might otherwise have used. There is no quiet resignation to pursue other opportunities. There is no confidential settlement with a non-disclosure clause and a handshake. There is no version of events in which this does not follow her. She departs Hartwell Logistics not on her own terms, not with a reference letter, not with the controlled narrative she has spent 6 years learning to construct. She departs under formal investigation. Daniel Reyes is not disciplined. The board's review of the communications shows clearly what his situation was. A man made vulnerable by a visa process that ran through the very department he was asked to report to. He was not a willing participant. He was a lever that was pulled. He is quietly reassigned to a role outside HR's oversight footprint, and the matter is noted in the record without prejudice. I am glad of that. I had never been angry at Daniel. I had simply stopped telling him things. On the afternoon the external audit confirms its findings. I take the lift back to my floor, sit down at my desk, and open the compliance platform. The dossier file is still there, time-stamped, intact, every entry in the sequence the system recorded it. I navigate to the file properties, I close it, I log out. There is no celebration in that, no particular feeling of triumph. The work was the work. The record was the record. The only thing I had ever done was file it correctly. Some people read silence as surrender. But sometimes, silence is simply someone who understands that the most dangerous document in any room is the one that was filed correctly, on time, in a system you signed the mandate for yourself. And when that record finally speaks, it speaks without emotion, without exaggeration, and without mercy. Justice does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives as a governance item, tabled at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, already in front of every person in the room before the door opens. That is what it means to serve it cold. Was this justice, or did she go too far?